And everywhere that Mary went, this sheep was sure to go. I told you once why they do that for a sound check.
Why?
Because the first recording was Thomas Edison, and he made a record, and that's the first thing he recorded. Mary had a little lamb. So that's why it became noyig that when you're doing a sound check, you do Mary had a little lamb. All right, showtime. Hi, this is David Orlofsky, and welcome back to the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. And whether you're watching with our friends over at Torah Anytime, wherever you watch or listen to your podcasts, as always, thank you. Thank you. You don't know how meaningful this is, because there are a lot of people I know who would love to be able to do what I'm doing, and they actually try to, but nobody watches them. So, you don't have much of a podcast unless you have people watching. I'll tell you an irony. I have to a certain extent, guesstimate how many people watch the podcast, because we're on so many different platforms, and a lot of people take it and put it up on a different platform and send it out, or on a WhatsApp group or something like that. So I have trouble tracking it. The closest number I can get is about 20,000. And I mentioned this during my podcast with Tovia Singer, about 20,000. And one of the many nasty comments I got was, who is this guy kidding? He doesn't have 20,000 people, watching. I've looked at, the video, it doesn't have that many people. So I actually responded to this comment. I said, because we're on multiple platforms, this is not the only place where we are. And it turns out that the episode with Tovia Singer on YouTube has 22,000 views. So burn, baby. Anyway, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment. And thank you to those people who sometimes just write comment. Because somehow that helps the algorithm. I don't know what an algorithm is. I don't know how it helps it. And I can't figure this out. But no. Thank you very much. And we have a sponsorship this week, sponsored by Moshe and Dovid. Hi, Rabbi Orlofsky. Just wanted to thank you for the last 3 years that you have been influencing us daily. Isn't that nice? 3 years that I have had a Zchusim to be a part of their lives. May you and your wife see loads of Nachas from the whole family. And may we share in Simchos with the whole Orlofsky nation. We're on our way. By the way, when he says Orlofsky nation, he's not talking about my family. He's talking about all of us. We are all part of this thing together. And be zeicha to walk all our children to the chuppahs with gesund, and watch our children walk their children to their chuppahs. Isn't that great? That sounds so beautiful. Thank you so much. And in Mitzvah Hashem, we will. Okay. I'm doing this for a long time, and I've mentioned this more than once, that I'm never really sure what to say. Sometimes I do. Like I said in the last episode, I hadn't talked in a while. We had pre-recorded, and so I had a lot of stuff saved up I wanted to talk about. But sometimes I'm like, I'm not sure what to talk about, and people send me suggestions. It's interesting how cutting edge we are. Because, for example, when I did it, someone suggested that I speak about bullying, and I did an episode on bullying. And next thing you know, I see in all the different Jewish publications, they're all talking about bullying. So we're always on the cutting edge. So producer Yisrael just pointed out, he goes, I don't know, when you used to do your question and answer, we used to do 3 or 4 in an episode, and you'd give relatively short answers, And now you seem to be, we're lucky when we get through 1 question an episode, because you're talking much more. I said, because when I was answering questions like, what's your favorite Miami Boys choir song or something like that, that doesn't take a whole lot to answer when you have relatively short questions. But when people ask very deep questions, and every now and then we're going over the questions, and I say, that's an episode. That question is an episode by itself. So this episode is based on a question. So if you sent this into the question and answer, It's not going to be in question and answer. It's going to be in the main body of the podcast. And the question was, do you believe in conspiracy theories? Now, I'm going to telegraph the punchline. If I didn't, this would be a very short episode. No, that it goes very short. I was on a panel. My good friend YY, who has recently moved to Israel, we wish him and his Rebbetzin an easy klita. But he was hosting an encounter conference in Manchester. And at the end of the program, it was a question and answer. The question and answer was Rabbi Yonason Rosenblum and Rebbetzin Heller and Rabbi Sinclair from Or Sameach and myself. And they would ask a question, and everyone on the panel felt obligated to answer the question. And in fact, I remember one time someone asked Rabbi Sinclair, do you miss being in Hollywood? And he answered the question. And then Rabbi Heller answered the question. And then Jonathan Rosenblum answered the question. And then the MC answered the question. And finally they come to me and I said, how do I know if Rabbi Sinclair misses being in Hollywood? Why are you asking me this question? But they were all giving their own takes on Hollywood and entertainment, all kinds of things, but that wasn't the question, So at one point there was a question which was put to Yonason Rosenblum, since he, writes about politics a lot, and they said, do you feel the Haredim in Eretz Yisrael are doing enough to reach out to the secular? And he answered the question. And then Rabbi Sinclair answered the question. And then Rabbi Heller answered the question. And everybody spoke for a while. And then they come to me and they say, Rabbi Orlofsky, do you believe that the Haredim are doing enough to reach out to the secular Jews? And I said, no. To tremendous applause. Because I hear myself talk all the time. These people should really get a podcast. Then they wouldn't need to speak so much. I get it all out of my system, which is good because, very often when I'm with my family, I don't really get a word in. So this way I have an audience of over 20,000 nasty commenter on Tuvia Singer. And I could talk as much as I want. But so sometimes a question is, like that. And sometimes a question requires a longer answer. I was on a question and answer panel on a regular basis in Discovery. Usually it was myself, Ari Khan, and Matti Berger. And Matti Berger basically took the approach that every question was an opportunity for him to give a mini shir, which he did. Right? When Ari was there, it was a little harder. When it was just me and him, forget about it. I commented once, I said, me and Matti agree on one thing, we disagree on another. We both agree that he has a lot of worthwhile things to say. We disagree as to whether or not I do. So there are many times I wouldn't even get a word in. He would just did someone ask a question and he would just give his entire share on that topic, and I would just sit there and smile, which is okay because I don't need to speak. I'm okay. I'm happy to be an audience. I heard this story. I never checked it out. As I always say, I'm not Pesach Kron. So sei gesund stark. He should be well. Where I heard this story with Rabbi Teitz. I don't know if it's true or not, but this is what I heard. He was invited to be a speaker at Malava Malka. And it was getting later and later. And there was a speech, an introduction to the speech, and then the speech, an introduction to the introduction to the introduction to the speech. It just went on. And finally, by the time they introduced him, it was 12 o'clock at night. And he gets up there and says, I was invited to be the guest speaker, but apparently I was really meant to be the guest listener. Have a good shot. Have a good vach, everybody. And he sat down to tremendous applause. So I I've told this story before, I'm sure. I was speaking at the Women's Shmiras Haloshin for the first time. Thousands of women come. And they told us to speak for between 35 and 40 minutes. And the first Rav was a Rav originally from Switzerland. He spoke for a full hour. The next was a Mashkiach. He spoke for an hour and 20 minutes. And I'm looking out at the room, and the room is literally asleep. I have this with one of my kids, where I always have to explain to them the difference between literally and figuratively, I was literally starving to death. No, you were figuratively starving to death. You were not literally starving. And they have a son who's like 5 years old, and he goes, Abba, I was literally I picked it up. Anyway, so I'm looking out, and the room is literally asleep. So I had to wake everybody up, and I spoke extra powerfully, very loud. I was leaning into the microphone, and I was booming, and I was like, get everybody up, And I spoke for 37 minutes. And people said to me afterwards, why did you speak for so short? I said, you're asking the wrong question. I spoke for the right amount of time. The question is, why did everybody else speak for so long? That's the correct question. I was speaking at the Or Sameach Shul in Toronto, Canada. I don't know if it's still there anymore. And I was speaking in between Mincha and Ma'ariv, and they said, speak between 14 and 18 minutes. Pretty specific. And I spoke for 16 minutes. And I sat down, and the person came up to me in a panic and said, why'd you speak so short? I said, listen, I may not be a math whiz, but I know that 16 is in between 14 and 18. And he says, when we tell that to any other speaker, it's 35 minutes. This is something that infuriates me, by the way. It infuriates me. I used to go to a minyan, and one of my great objections was, let's say they would write down, Ma'ariv is 6:10. And somebody would get up to speak in between Mincha and Ma'ariv. And now it's about 6:20. And they all do the same move. They look at their watch. They look up at the clock. They look back at the watch and go, Efshar lahamshich? Can I keep going? And one person goes, Kane. And everyone's like, no. I think that's achzorius. You should write the time. Ma'ariv is whenever whoever's speaking decides that they finish. But don't tell people Ma'ariv is a certain time and then not do it. So on rare occasions, they would ask me to speak. And if Ma'ariv is at 6:10, I could be in the middle of a sentence. I would stop. And I'd say, well, we're out of time. Have a good Shabbos. And people were like, you can finish. I said, then write a different time for Ma'ariv, So I don't like to go over, speak what you're supposed to do. Anyway, so when it's a short question, I can answer it pretty easily. When it's a little longer one, I have to spend a little bit more time. I don't give an entire share, but sometimes a question comes up, and I tell producer Yisrael, this will be an episode by itself. Yeah. And he reminded me of one of the questions that I set aside. And the question is, do you believe in conspiracy theories? So like I said, if the answer was no, it would be a real short episode. So let's be magdia what we mean by a conspiracy theory. Yeah. I remember seeing a bumper sticker years ago that said, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you. You get it? You understand? You're paranoid, but just because you're paranoid doesn't mean you're wrong. The same thing when it comes to conspiracy theories. Just because someone calls it a conspiracy theory doesn't make it true. I'll give you a very recent example. Yeah? Donald Trump said that the COVID virus came out of the COVID lab in Wuhan, China. And Dr. Fauci said, no, it came from the wet market, people eating bats or something. I don't know what it was, there was a scene where Jon Stewart, who is a comedian, was on Stephen Colbert's show. And Stephen Colbert actually got his start with Jon Stewart when they were, on the Jon Stewart show. And he went off and got his own show from there on Comedy Central until he got another show. But he says to him, there's a place in China, in Wuhan, China, where everyone agrees the virus started. And it's called the COVID lab. Now, work this one out for me. Where do you think it came from? And he didn't want to, insult his mentor, but he's like, well, that's just a conspiracy theory. And that's what they call it. They call it conspiracy theory. Now, everyone agrees. It's even the New York Times came around and said, yes, Trump was right. It was actually there. So the fact that people called it a conspiracy theory didn't make it a conspiracy theory, right? Sometimes there's a conspiracy theory that really is a conspiracy theory. It's based on a series of events which you can tie together. But if you look into it, you'll see that it's not true. One of my favorite examples. Reagan bombed Tripoli when Gaddafi was in charge of Libya. They had done different things against America. And he sent his planes to bomb Libya, Tripoli. Now, they were flying from England. The fastest way to go would have been to fly right across France to Libya. But France would not let them fly over. So instead, the pilots had to fly all the way around the Iberian Peninsula and come down to be able to bomb it. It took a much longer flight. Anytime you have a flight like that with a military mission, it puts the people at more risk. And they bombed whatever military targets. By accident, they bombed the French embassy. I'm sure it was an accident. Reagan would not have on purpose bombed the French embassy. But there was this comedian, and he said, hey, we just bombed Libya, and everyone's cheering, And he says, and we accidentally bombed the French embassy. Maybe if our planes didn't have to fly so far around France, their aim would have been better. The implication being that because France wouldn't let us fly, we blew them up on purpose. Not true, obviously, but it's a confluence of events that makes it sound interesting. That was the Russian conspiracy where they claimed that Donald Trump was in cahoots with Russia to fix the election. There was no evidence to support it, but that didn't stop every major news outlet from reporting it over and over again. Congressman Schiff, who's now Senator Schiff, said, I have secret information that proves it. It was all a lie. He was censored by Congress. He didn't have any evidence. It was just lie. That's a conspiracy. That's a conspiracy. It was a conspiracy to promulgate a story that clearly wasn't true. And it turns out that the story actually started from a law firm that was working for Hillary Clinton and spread this to try to take away support from Donald Trump during the election. It was all a lie. That's a conspiracy, right? So just because something is a conspiracy theory doesn't mean it's not true. Because it could be there's an actual conspiracy. Like to cover up the origins of COVID-19. That was a conspiracy. And it was clear. And anyone who tried to offer the truth was silenced. They were canceled. They weren't. They were taken off of social media. Whatever they could do to stop it. They called it a conspiracy theory, but they were lying, as opposed to the Russiagate, which was a lie, and they created a conspiracy to spread a lie. So So when you say, do you believe in conspiracy theories? The answer is that just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you. Just because it's a conspiracy theory doesn't mean the conspiracy is not true. So let's take one of the most famous ones, which is the JFK assassination, right? The Warren Commission did a study wherein they investigated and interviewed, etc., and they all concluded, there was one assassin. He was in the book depository. He's the one who shot it. But there were a lot of questions that were unanswered. There were people who were not interviewed. There were people who were interviewed and the testimony was not included in the Warren report. So that makes people very suspicious. How come these other people were not questioned? Yeah. So when you look at it and then you see, how could a bullet have been shot, go through him, go through this, hit John Connolly, come out this way, go out that way? How is that possible? And so the theory came in that there was another shooter. And he was on the grassy knoll, and there were witnesses who said they saw somebody there, and whatever it is, they heard more than one shot when you listen to recordings. So Lyndon Johnson, by the way, my good friend Joe Werfel Shalom had given me this very, very large book called The Power Broker, about the life of Robert Moses, who had a 40-year reign of power in New York and did the most amazing things. A very, very large book, but it reads like a novel. It's all his history, but it reads like a novel. And in fact, it won an award. They gave it an award of history as literature. That's how good it was. And his next project, this guy, Robert Caro, was a biography of Lyndon Johnson. And he has put out 4 of the 5 books. I hope he puts out the 5th one. He's in his 80s. We'll see what happens. But all 4 of the books were leading up to his presidency. It didn't really encompass his presidency except for the first few months. And the 4th book, basically, Lyndon Johnson was the head of the Senate. And he was, the 3rd book is called Master of the Senate. He managed to get the Senate to do what he wanted. And the Senate is unmanageable. It was designed to be unmanageable. And in fact, the story goes, it was definitely George Washington, and I think the other one was Jefferson, but I'm not sure. But he says, why would you set up the Senate in this way where people can, there's going to be backlogs and delays and you're not going to get things passed? And why? So he says, how come I see you poured some of your tea into your saucer? He says, so that it should cool off. He says, that's the purpose of the Senate. I don't want a rabble in the House of Representatives to suddenly pass a bill and then instantly be able to go someplace with it. The Senate is designed to slow it down. And this has created backlog in government for many, many years. And he claims, George Washington, the founders did that intentionally to slow things down so that you don't have... America is not a democracy, it's a republic, without getting into all the differences over there. But the idea is not just everybody could right away have a big vote, push a button and say yes or no on anything. You have to take your time to consider it so that things don't happen instantaneously. It leads to frustration to many people that government moves so slowly, but the founders wanted that on purpose. They didn't trust government. Anyway, be that as it may, so Johnson figured out how to work the Senate, and he was one of the most effective leaders. And then he decided to become Kennedy's vice president, and they basically geschmetted him. They treated him like a joke. They this, that. And Kennedy didn't know what he was doing because he wasn't a great politician. He was very charismatic and he had a lot of ideas, but he didn't know how to keep the machine of government going. And so all of his projects were getting stalled. Nothing was getting passed in Congress. Lyndon Johnson knew how to get things through, but they didn't ask him. So when Kennedy was assassinated, suddenly Lyndon Johnson, who had been nobody for 3 years, 3.5 years, was suddenly pushed in as president. And he had 6 months to calm down the country because they assumed Russia was behind this, Mafia was behind it, this one was behind it, that one, Cuba, the CIA. No one knew who was behind this. He had to calm down the country. He had to set up there was only a half a year left to the presidency, put everything back together, get everyone in, put the government together, pass the legislation. He describes this in the 4th book. He did it all in 6 months. He got it all done. But he basically took former Chief Justice Warren and said to him, you have to get this done and reassure the American people. So the goal of the Warren Commission was to tell everybody, there was Lee Harvey Oswald did it. He was the only guy. He had a gun. He was a lunatic. He didn't have anybody helping him. There was nobody else involved, so that America could calm down. America was in such a tenuous state. In the book, he describes everything that Johnson was up against and what a difficult time this was for America and how Johnson managed. He's probably the greatest part of his career was those 6 months, how he managed to keep America calm and reassured and pass JFK's agenda, and everything that he did was just remarkable. It's Kedai to read, just to the 4th volume of it. In any event, so lots of questions were left unanswered. There was actually a court case where people sued the government. I think it was in Georgia. I might be wrong on that. Where they introduced new evidence. And they wanted the government to take up the case again, that there was more than one person involved, and who was behind it, and who was Jack Ruby, who suddenly assassinated Lee Harvey Oswald before he could talk. And he said there were other people involved, and he was killed before he could say anything. So how is this all going? What was going on over here? And who made a movie about it? JFK. Oliver Stone, and he documents the case over there and the people. A number of the witnesses died suddenly. So does that mean there was something that was being hidden here? There's a lot of different theories. We don't know. But do I just automatically assume that the Warren Commission gave the full story? For a fact, I know that's not true. So if you question who actually was responsible for the Kennedy assassination, so they call you a conspiracy theorist. But there's evidence. The evidence is amazing. Now, whether it's true or not, I don't know. Yeah. Princess Diana was, the official story is she was with this Arab businessman, and they were driving, and they were being chased by paparazzi, and they went into a tunnel, and suddenly they crashed and died. There are cameras all around Paris, but the cameras in that tunnel were off. And there's a lot of other evidence that there were funny things that were going on. It's a whole study. The kashas are all kashas. And the fact that you call it a conspiracy theory doesn't mean it's not true. Because like I say, they called the COVID a conspiracy theory, and it turned out to be right. Sometimes there are conspiracies, and people work very hard. this fellow Epstein from Epstein's Island, right? A lot of Jeffrey Epstein, a lot of high profile people came to the island, and he had a lot to be able to tell. And he was in a jail cell awaiting trial when he hanged himself. The guards who were supposed to be watching him claimed they fell asleep. The cameras, which were supposed to be filming him and the area, were all not working. In order to hang himself, he would have had to put the bed sheet and tie it to the upper bunk and jump off and kill himself. And the coroner said the injuries that he had did not correspond to that. But if you claim that somebody killed him, wow, conspiracy theorist. You know what I'm saying? It's a conspiracy. So, yeah, it could very well be there was a conspiracy. It could be there were a lot of important people who did not want what Jeffrey Epstein knew to come out, just like they didn't want what Lee Harvey Oswald had to say to come out. But is there enough evidence to definitively prove it one way or another? No. Just because there's smoke doesn't mean there's not fire. It could be there's just smoke and no fire. But the questions are very legitimate questions. And me, I am by nature a skeptic. My son, who's much more involved in Israeli society than I am, he said to me once, I live here in Israel, most people have no idea who I am. Israelis have no idea who I am. It was interesting. I mentioned in the last podcast when I went for Pesach. So I went up beforehand to meet with Mark, the manager, about the hotel, etc. When I went to speak to him at the end of Pesach, he said to me, I had no idea who you are. And I said, I didn't want you to. I said, I wanted to have the experience as a regular guest, not like to get special treatment, so that if I try to make a Pesach program here, I want to know what the average guest is going to go through. I don't want to know you are. So my son says to me, it's a good thing Israelis don't know who you are, or there'd be pashkevillas up about you every week. Pashkevillas are where they put up those signs where they come out condemning this or condemning that or attacking this, It says, but nobody knows what you say. So you're under the radar. You're just an American and no one knows, In America, they don't hang up pashkevillas the same way. They'll just maybe write a blistering editorial on the Yatate against you, But for the most part, I stay under the radar. But I'm by nature a cynic. I'm a cynic when it comes to the frum community. I'm a cynic when it comes to science. I'm a cynic when it comes to any of these topics. I say, just because a scientist says it, just because someone with a bunch of degrees after his name, says something, doesn't mean anything. And I remember Ben Shapiro was doing a question and answer once on a campus. And he made some sort of statement and he goes, did you ever study this in college? Do you have a degree in this? Do you have that? He goes, I don't need to go to college to know when something is nonsense. I don't need a degree in it. I don't have to study it for years to figure out what you're saying makes no sense. And I've mentioned this in the past, there are people who hide their lack of intellectualism and honesty behind jargon. They use fancy words to be able to say things. And I've encountered these people where, a person says to me, oh, so Judaism is anthrocentric. So I was able to figure out what that meant and I responded to them. Or they'll throw around terms like, well, from an epistemological point of view. And okay, so I happen to know what that means, But every now and then, I remember once I was answering a question and someone says, oh, that's a very simplistic answer. I said, so, what do you say? Because I can't explain it to you. It's too involved, too complicated. I said, try me. I'm a bright guy. Let's see. No, you wouldn't understand it. I said, give me a shot. Explain it to me. He goes, no, I can't put it in layman terms. So I just laughed and I said, listen, if your idea is so brilliant that you can't explain it to anybody, then it's really not worth anything. I don't feel like I have to respond to it. So if somebody comes to ask me a question and says, I have a brilliant answer to what you just said, but you can't understand it. Okay, so I don't really have to respond to it, do it. When you figure out how to put it into terms for us simple laymen, then I'll attempt to answer it. Shaya Cohen once said, the hardest question that he ever got, he used to run Arachim seminars in America. He said, the hardest question I have to answer is the one that the person hasn't thought of yet. He says, I get this a lot, where I present all of the proofs for Torah, and someone says, okay, I can't respond to what you're saying, but maybe there's somebody smarter out there who can. He says, okay, when you find him, have him come talk to me. But how am I supposed to answer a question that you haven't thought of yet? You know, brilliant. There must be, someone might have an answer. I remember once we were in Discovery doing question and answer, and someone says, asked the question to the panel. They said, okay, we heard what you have to say, but when are we going to hear the other side? So I don't know if it was Mati or Ari, one of them said, you were here for 2.5 days. Did you go to college? They teach you the other side in high school, in college. You've heard everything else. Nobody there taught you Torah. They taught you every other thing in the world. You've heard all the other arguments. This is the first time you've heard anything about Torah, and you're like, well, let's hear the other side. Mati says once he was teaching, Mati Berger, in H, and someone says, okay, I heard what you have to say here in the Jewish quarter, but there are 3 other quarters in Jerusalem. He says, that's true. The Christians, the Muslims, and the Armenians all agree that God gave the Torah to the Jews on Mount Sinai. The only one who gives me any trouble are the Jews. Everybody else believes it, you know? Somebody told me that there was this Christian woman on a plane and said, I can tell you're Jewish. She says, yeah. He goes, you know, I'm here with a Christian group, and the Christians believe that the Jews are the chosen people and that God gave the Bible to the Jews on Mount Sinai. He says, that's right. He says, how come Jews don't believe that? So all the Christians believe that. He says, because you can believe it and do whatever you want. If we believe it, we have to keep kosher, we have to keep Shabbos, we have lots of laws. So if you're objective, it doesn't make any difference. I used to say in Or Sameach, I used to say, you have to keep the Torah. The Torah is true. Torah says you have to go to town every night and get drunk and party. I said, you would all be ultra-Orthodox. Understand? But you're too invested. So when I hear something, I'm skeptical. So I'm fertile ground for conspiracy theories. When I hear something, I'm like, wait a second. That's a kasha. It could be the kasha turns out to be nothing, like when we bombed the French embassy. And it could be that there is something behind it. I don't know. But am I automatically going to dismiss it because, like they said by the COVID-19 leak, Wuhan lab leak, it's a conspiracy theory? No, just saying something as a conspiracy doesn't mean anything. I want to see what the evidence is, and I want to examine it. And there are very often things that are dismissed as conspiracy theories, and nobody answers the kashas. Okay, so let's take one example, right? There was, what was it called? There was a movie, Capricorn 3 or something, I don't know what it was called, where basically they realized that the rocket to the moon is not going to work. And so they want the astronauts on a soundstage to pretend they're on the moon. We'll use special effects, etc., to make it look like you're on the moon, and you'll act the whole thing out. And they do. And then what are you going to do? You have to keep these people quiet forever. So they announced on re-entry, the rocket blew up. Now, the astronauts didn't know this because obviously it meant they were going to kill them. So the 3 of them escape, and they track them down, and kill 2 of the 3, and the 3rd one manages to come and expose the whole thing. Based on this, there are people who say the moon landing never took place. It's a hoax. Since it could be a hoax, so we'll say it was a hoax. And they bring a whole bunch of different rayas, And I remember I looked into this once. I looked at all the kashas, and I looked at the terutzim. And the answers were excellent answers to all the questions. I don't remember all of their proofs, but one of the proofs was if you see the flag that they put on the moon, it's waving. Now, how could that be? There's no atmosphere on the moon. Why would the flag be waving? And the astronomer who answered up all the kashas, he said, it's not waving, it's extended on a pole, and they didn't pull it the whole way. If they pulled it the whole way, it would be standing straight. But they didn't. And they point out other different kind of things that they ask all kind of kashas, and they answer them all up. So from my point of view, that's fine. That's wonderful evidence. The fact that you want to ask questions, that's great. But then you have to listen to the answers. And you can't just say, well, it could be. I remember seeing a cartoon once where these two people come to heaven and they say, okay, you're in heaven now. What do you want to know? It says, who killed JFK? So God answers them and says, it was Lee Harvey Oswald. There was only one shooter. And one guy turns to his friend and says, I told you, it goes all the way to the top. Which is, of course, ridiculous. But the idea is that, if there are kashas and you can't answer the kashas, then you leave it as a tzarech iyan. I'm not saying it's a tiyufta. I'm not saying that you completely disproved it, but you haven't completely proved it either. And so, when questions are left unanswered like this, so where's the evidence? What happened? How do you explain it? So that's why when you use a term like conspiracy theory, it's too much of a catch-all term. It doesn't tell me anything. The fact that there's an official story, as Napoleon Bonaparte said, history is the series of events agreed upon by the victors. So that if the British won the American Revolutionary War, then the Continental Congress would have been remembered like Guy Fawkes. They were a bunch of rebels who tried to rebel against the crown and were all hanged. And they would be seen as traitors, and terrorists. And, I forgot who said it, that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. It all depends how you tell the story and who the heroes and who the villains are. So yeah, it's good to be critical. It's good to go back and examine and see where the facts are. But just the fact that someone decided to call it conspiracy theory, that doesn't do anything for me. When a person asks a question and someone goes, apicursus, I'm not impressed. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But can you answer it? You have to know how to answer. What's the answer to the question? Forget about name calling. What is it is? And if you see a situation where you see a lot of questions, it's okay. I'm not prepared to erase the questions just because someone called it conspiracy theory. Okay, I hope that clarifies it a little bit. And that brings us to the actual question and answer portion of our program. Oh, my good friend Yoel Shmuel. How is a person on this physical world able to affect and generate Zchusim for a Neshama that has passed on to Olam HaEmes? We are taught that Hayom la'asosam u'mochel lekabel schar. Right? The actual quote is Hayom la'asosam v'lo mochel la'asosam, Hayom la'asosam u'mochel lekabel schar. Today you do, tomorrow you can't do. Today you do, and tomorrow you get your schar. How can we change the result of one's judgment on Yom Hadin? Mitzvahs are not normally transferable one person to another. You have to earn them on your own. Does this concept apply only to a child? As always, thank you so much for all of your amazing Torah words. This is a fascinating area. There is definitely a special ability by a child. As the Chazal say, Bra mezakeh es Abba. A child can give a zchus to a father. We have more than that. The Gemara says that if you're Messiah ledvar aveira, if you help somebody do a sin, you get responsibility for that sin. And says the Gemara, and so too, if you help somebody do a mitzvah, you get the schar for that mitzvah, which is something that I find comforting, because it means all the years that I've spent in Chinuch and Kiruv, where I've had a positive impact on people's lives, and people tell me something that you said changed my life, or changed my davening, or changed this, or changed that. So when I get upstairs, I intend on taking credit for all of that. But once the person isn't here anymore, so what's the concept? The concept is the following. I remember when I was speaking to Rav Mendel Weinbach about this. Zatzal, the Rosh Yeshiva of Or Sameach. He quoted Julius Caesar. He says, I can quote it to you, but these college kids have never heard of Shakespeare. I can't quote it. These kids know nothing. It's absolutely amazing. I used to say this when I taught in Orla Golah. I said, you understand, college kids know nothing today. You know, you're sure that these are all brilliant. They know nothing. And a guy who later went to work on UCLA, he said to me, when you said that in class, I didn't believe it. But now that I'm working on campus, I can't believe how little these people know, you know. When I first started teaching in Discovery, they had 2 1.5-hour classes responding to evolution. When I came on, they had gotten rid of them. They said, we spent most of the first class teaching the theory of evolution because these college students didn't know what it was. And then the second class explaining why it wasn't a problem. So we just cut it out altogether. And while I was there, every now and then somebody would ask a question to the question and answer panel. What about evolution? And one of the rabbis would say, yeah, it's not a problem. And they'd say, okay. It was amazing. Yeah. What about dinosaurs? Yeah, what about them? Were they dinosaurs? Yeah. Oh, okay. Anyway, that was it. You know, so it's amazing a little. So he says, I can't do it. But it says in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, in Mark Antony's Hesped, you know, the famous scene, he goes, the good that men do, I may be misquoting, so the evil, I forgot which one was, it starts with, the evil that men do live on after them, but the good that they do is forgotten with them. He says, we believe the exact opposite. Ra is not real. Like we say, we say that Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur in the Ator Kadosh Tefillah, all evil will disappear like a puff of smoke. Evil is sheker. It's not real. It has no of its own existence. And that's why when we die and we go to the next world, all the bad things that we've done, it's not us. It's not really us. That's why there's, a little cute thing that they say in the 2 parshios, Acharimos Kadoshim. After death, everyone's holy. What does that mean? That means because the bad things that we do aren't real. They don't represent who we really are. The good things represent who we really are. So we do things in this world, and those things that we do continue on. But that's as a result of the decisions we made when we were alive. So let's take a simple example, right? I establish a Keren that will generate a certain amount of money every year to give scholarships for kids to go to yeshiva. I'm dead 50 years, and I'm still giving money to kids to be able to go and learn Torah in yeshiva. And that kid who goes to yeshiva is going because of me. It's a continuation of the action that I did. I encourage someone to become Shomer Torah and mitzvos. And that person goes on and keeps Torah and mitzvos because of me. And now they go out and influence other people because of me. This is a pyramid scheme. You understand? This is Amway, and they have children and grandchildren who all Shomer Torah mitzvahs because of me. So up in Shemayim, my account keeps clicking because that's all because of what I did down in this world. So I decided to have children. A lot of people today are not. People decide that children are too much of a hassle for them, But people have children, and it's not easy having children. I'm not talking about the actual delivery. That wasn't so bad. I got through most of the deliveries with just a mild amount of medication. But afterwards, raising them, and the amount of time that you invest, and the money that you invest, and all the things that go into it, that's tremendous. That's tremendous. My wife had a friend who gave her a phrase that became our byword while we were raising our children, and that is, the goal of chinuch is not to raise good kids, it's to raise good adults. And I take a look at my adult children, who are all out there doing things for Klal Yisrael. Some more, some less. All of them are having an influence on the world in a positive way. That's because we chose to have these kids and to raise them with a set of values, and all the sleepless nights and all of the meals and all of the, when it's an hour past bedtime and the kid comes in and says, I have a report due tomorrow I forgot about. And you're up writing. I've definitely done more homework since I became a parent than I ever did when I went to school. And all the things that invested, the fact that these kids are going on. You'll forgive me, but everyone knows who I am by this point. I'll quote Dan Fogelberg. My life has been a poor attempt to imitate the man. I'm just a living legacy to the leader of the band. Yeah. We bring our kids up with values. We try to send them off. Sometimes we're more successful, sometimes we're less successful. But what those kids are doing, they're doing because we gave them life. We worked to bring them into this world. We did something. And so that goes to our credit. And so therefore, when a kid does something down here, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to us up in Shemayim, that's because of you. So let's take a simple example. Pretty well-known fellow, Rashi. Yeah. Every year on his yahrzeit, Rashi gets called up because the yahrzeit is a Yom Adin. Even for the people who have passed away, the yahrzeit is a Yom Adin for them. What are you judging them for? They're dead. So they say, okay, Rashi, what'd you do this year? He says, well, a lot of floating. Basically. Goes, yeah, well, let's check your account. Oh my goodness. Look at how many people learned Chumash and Rashi this year. Look at how many people learned Navi with Rashi this year. Look at how many people learned Gemara with Rashi. Look at all of the Torah that you spread in the world this year, even though you're dead for 1,000 years. All of that gets added to your account. We move you up another level. And Rashi says in French, cool. Yeah, because it's an amazing thing. Look at what I'm continuing to accomplish. And so we do things and we have no idea what we're doing. We don't. I've told this story more than once. Yeah. Jonathan Rosenblum told this story about these 3 Hollywood screenwriters who were having brunch in the Pico area on a Saturday morning. Saturday brunch, whatever brunch time is. And this family's coming back from shul. The mommy and the daddy and the children, and everyone's dressed well, and they're all talking and they're speaking and they're smiling and they walk past these people. And they watch them walk down the street. And one of them says to his 2 friends, they were all Jewish, we'll never have what they have. And the 3 of them decided to go to the Eshet Torah branch. And they started taking classes, and they all became frum. And they started using their skills to make educational materials to teach Torah. So the way Jonathan Rosenblum puts it is, imagine this family gets up to Shemayim and they get this, they're looking over their account. They know what they did. They davened here, they did this, they get stuck. And suddenly there's this whole stack of schuyas. He says, where did this come? He says, well, you made these people from. And so you get credit for their actions and their children and their grandchildren. Also, they did kiruv and they reached hundreds of people. And they, dozens of them became from. You get schus for all of them. All we did was walk down the street with a smile on our face. And we changed the world. And all of those Zchusim go to us and to our account. I was by no means the worst son in the world. I was by no means the best. And if I was honest and I looked at myself, I would have said, if I could go back in time and say, Dad, I don't know why you're having these kids. We're all a bunch of ingrates. We're miserable to you. We complain, we this, we that. Let's face it, somebody said to me, it used to be in my generation, parents used to save up money for college. Today, you save up money for therapy, And you'll see if you're already at this stage in life, but once you start having a bunch of kids in their 20s, one of their favorite activities is sitting around the Shabbos table saying how you destroyed their lives. Everything you did wrong, whatever you said, you did this, you did that, you said this, And complaints. Why would you do it? And I am keenly aware of the fact that everything that I do is because my parents made a number of choices. One is they decided to have me. When I was getting married, somebody said to me, how many children do you plan to have? I said, well, as many as the Lord blesses me with. They said, no, you can't do that. You have to decide. I said, okay, what's the right number? They said 4. I said, well, I have a little problem with that because I'm number 5 in my family. And even though my brothers might argue they would have a happier life if I wasn't born, I like to think I've made some mild contribution to the world. And my younger brother, Bruce, who's number 6, feels even stronger about it than I do. Sometimes people say to me, how many kids do you have? Sheldon goes, that's too many. I said, okay, pick out 2 and I'll kill them. So you can't do that. I said, but that's what you're doing. You're saying don't let them be born. So from their point of view, whether I never have them or I kill them, it works out the same. They never get to live a life. So everything I do is because my parents decided to have me. And then at some point, my parents decided to send us to the Hebrew Academy of Nassau County, even though they had gone bankrupt and they didn't have the money, and get me a Jewish education, or I definitely would not be from today. And the fact that there was a Hebrew Academy of Nassau County only because Rabbi Findel decided to go and dedicate his life to being Marbitz Torah, and he went out to Long Island with nothing and started to build a school. Well, I wouldn't have had a school to go to. And on and on and on. So when I do a mitzvah, so there's no question, my father, my mother, Rabbi Findel, Rabbi Whale, the person who was actually Mekayr of me in Ag, all these people are getting points up in Shemayim. Because I'm doing it. But they were the catalyst. They caused it to happen. So a son has a special ability to do this, but so does anyone else. If someone says, I was inspired by what you did or what you said to do something, the Gemara says clearly, the person can get schar for it. So Bra Mezakeh is Abba, that's the Mesil Shalom says in Perek Dalet, that's called din. That's not even Rachamim, it's din. But din, it makes sense that a child can be able to give that schus to his parents. But anybody who feels that they've been moved by someone and uses that ability to do something good in this world, to do it Eloi Nishmas, then the person in the next world, it goes to their account. And that's it for this episode. If you want to find out more about the show, you can go to my website, RabbiOrlofsky.com. You can ask a question, sponsor an episode. Please, we need sponsors. Sponsor a question and answer, sponsor Parsha and 5. Sign up for one of our online shiurim. That's it till next time. And until then, I am Dovid Orlofsky, and this has been the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.
It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Knowledge and wisdom will help you grow. Lots of fun in every episode, and we don't have to rhyme. No, we don't. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show on RabbiOrlofsky.com. Torah anytime, YouTube and more. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simchos, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Till next time, till we meet again. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.